The weight of a family's expectations can sometimes crush you silently, without a single word spoken aloud. Last Christmas, I quietly handed over $3,000, my savings, to cover Lily's wedding dress and the venue fees. Not a single thank you came my way, not even a glance. Grace, my mother, smiled warmly at the guests, praising Lily as the star of the family, her voice dripping with pride that felt, to me, like a public performance. But behind closed doors, I caught Grace's eyes, cold, sharp, unreadable. She looked at me as if I were an inconvenient shadow, something best ignored or erased. I've learned to live in that shadow. No one sees the sacrifices I make, the silent burdens I carry. I'm Scarlett Adams, the forgotten daughter, the family's invisible ATM, the emotional anchor nobody acknowledges. I've always been the one to pick up the pieces, to put my hand in my pocket when others don't have a dime. I keep a meticulous ledger of every dollar I spend on this family, every unpaid loan, every bill I cover. It's my silent armor, my secret power, one no one suspects because it's hidden beneath years of quiet endurance. That Uber ride last week, the driver's voice low and hurried over the phone, caught my attention. Something whispered beneath the gloss of family smiles, a secret I can't quite grasp yet, but I'm listening. I have to be. My mind drifts back to my high school graduation, the moment the family's fractured dynamics first became crystal clear. I was the valedictorian, the one who'd worked tirelessly, sacrificing weekends and late nights to study. Yet, at the ceremony, my mother's attention was elsewhere, always elsewhere. Grace whispered something to Aunt Margaret, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. Scarlett's smart, but too serious. Lily's the charm. Lily, my younger sister, barely scraped through, but she got the spotlight. She received a $10,000 college fund. I got a used laptop and a polite pat on the back. I told myself it was okay. Maybe Mom just wanted Lily to have a better start, but that moment carved a deep fissure in my heart. The pattern was set. Lily, the golden child, glowing with effortless favor, and me, the scapegoat, invisible yet burdened with unspoken expectations. The years since then have been a blur of sacrifices I never expected to make. I saved $20,000 to help renovate the family home, covered bills that averaged $1,200 every month, and even lent $5,000 to Lily's fiancé for a car down payment, never a hint of repayment. Through it all, Ethan, my husband, stood by me quietly, offering steady support and gentle advice to set boundaries I wasn't ready to enforce. Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, is the only one who seems to notice the strain beneath my smile. At family dinners, she watches Grace closely, her eyes filled with a cautious concern I don't dare voice aloud. I document everything: texts, receipts, whispered promises that never materialize. Despite the exhaustion, I cling to the hope that loyalty means sacrifice, that family means keeping peace no matter the cost. Then came the night of Lily's wedding rehearsal dinner, a gathering that should have been joyful but quickly turned into a battleground. Grace lavished praise on Lily, her words dripping with adoration, while she sneered at me, commenting on my modest dress and what she called a lack of enthusiasm. Her whispers to the guests, always the responsible one but never really part of the fun, cut through me like a knife. The Uber driver waiting outside caught the edge in her voice, the unspoken jabs that sliced beneath the surface. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. I fought back the urge to cry, telling myself, "It's just Grace being Grace." I forced out a small retort, "I'm happy for Lily," but inside, doubt settled deep. Maybe I wasn't really part of this family's heart after all. The sting was fresh, but I swallowed it down. For now. The moment I dared to push back just a little, Grace's claws dug in deeper. It was subtle at first, whispers in the background at family gatherings, sideways glances where her lips barely curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I caught wind of conversations where she painted me as too controlling, sulking over imagined slights, a drama queen who needed to lighten up. Friends who once greeted me warmly now greeted me with polite distance or didn't greet me at all. Invitations I expected never arrived or came with excuses that felt thin and rehearsed. It wasn't just Grace anymore. Her loyal allies, including Lily, amplified the chorus. Lily, oblivious or complicit, parroted Grace's venom with a sweetness that made it sting worse. "Mom's just worried you're overworked, Scarlett. She doesn't want you stressing so much." The gaslighting was relentless. Grace denied everything that had come before as if my memories were fabrications. When I brought up money she had promised to return, she accused me of keeping score and twisting words. At family dinners, she'd smile and say, "I don't know why you're upset. I've always supported you." Her voice was honeyed but hollow, and I felt the room tilt as others nodded, unsure of where the truth lay. At one point, I overheard her telling Aunt Margaret, "Scarlett's just imagining slights. She's too sensitive." Aunt Margaret's face tightened, her eyes flickering with worry, but she said nothing. I felt myself shrinking. An invisible figure pushed further to the edge of the circle. Even Ethan, steady and pragmatic, noticed the change. "They're circling, Scarlett. You're being isolated," he said softly, his hand on my back one evening. "They want you to question yourself until you're alone." His words haunted me, but I was still too hopeful, too desperate to preserve the fragile peace. Every attempt I made to explain myself, to clarify that I wasn't asking for special treatment, just fairness, fell on deaf ears. The silence that greeted my words was a cold wall, impenetrable and unforgiving. I was increasingly aware that this wasn't just about money or favors. It was a war of narratives, and I was losing the battle for my own story. So I withdrew, biting back tears that threatened to betray me in front of my family. I wasn't ready to fight yet, not openly, but inside, something was hardening. Grace's campaign to erase me from the family's emotional map was working, but I wasn't going to disappear without a fight. I just needed to find the strength to stand taller, to hold the line, even if I felt utterly alone. I thought, maybe if I could lay everything bare, show them the truth in black and white, there might be some chance to heal. So I called for a family meeting, hoping honesty and openness would crack the ice. I prepared meticulously, pulling together my ledger of every dollar I'd spent, the tuition I'd covered, the bills I'd paid, the loans I'd quietly made. I wanted to show them not just numbers, but the sacrifices behind those numbers. Aunt Margaret agreed to mediate, a cautious olive branch in a field scorched by resentment. The day of the meeting felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken tension. I tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke, laying out the facts with as much calm as I could muster. "I'm not asking for special treatment," I said, "just acknowledgement of the support I've given. I've carried more than my share, and it's wearing me down." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of understanding in Aunt Margaret's eyes, but then Grace's mask slipped into place. She folded her arms, her lips twitching into a faux sympathetic smile, and with a voice sweet as poison, she accused me of keeping score and undermining family harmony. "Family isn't a ledger, Scarlett," she said, eyes flicking to Aunt Margaret. "It's about love, forgiveness, and letting go." Her words twisted my truth into a weapon against me. Aunt Margaret shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty to her sister and her own conscience. Lily sat quietly, her expression unreadable but clearly siding with their mother. By the time the meeting ended, I was hollowed out, defeated. Grace left the room smirking, triumphant in the subtle destruction she'd wrought. I sat with my hurt and humiliation swirling inside me, the weight of rejection pressing down harder than ever. I glanced at Ethan, who reached for my hand, his touch steady and warm. "You deserve better than this silence and lies," he whispered. I nodded, swallowing my pain, realizing that peaceful resolution was a mirage, and the path ahead would be lonelier and fiercer than I had imagined. The funeral was supposed to be a solemn, unifying occasion, but for me, it became the stage for Grace's most brutal performance yet. I had spent weeks organizing every detail, the floral arrangements I paid for out of pocket, the guest list, coordinating the catering, and preparing the memorial speech. I thought this would be my chance to finally step into the light, to be seen and appreciated. Instead, Grace turned it into a public spectacle of humiliation. From the moment guests arrived, I felt the cold weight of her disdain. Grace took every opportunity to minimize my efforts, loudly praising Lily for masterminding the event, and handling everything with such grace. Lily beamed under the spotlight, soaking in the praise that should have been mine. When I stepped up to deliver the speech, my voice trembling but clear, I noticed whispers and stifled chuckles. Grace's eyes gleamed with triumph. Then came the final blow, a minor mishap with the catering, an overcooked dish that delayed the meal by a few minutes. Grace immediately seized on it, turning to the relatives and saying with venomous clarity, "I don't know how Scarlett managed this disaster. Maybe if she had asked for help instead of trying to do everything herself." The room fell silent, the words hanging like a guillotine blade. I felt the heat rise to my face, a flush of humiliation deeper than any I'd known. Family friends exchanged uneasy glances, and I heard the faint murmur of gossip, the kind that erodes reputations quietly but thoroughly. The damage wasn't just emotional. Over the next days, I noticed subtle shifts in how acquaintances spoke about me, hints of incompetence, of unreliability. I could feel my professional world inching toward the edge as these whispers seeped into social circles connected to my work. The humiliation was a calculated strike, and Grace wielded it with precision. For the first time, I felt my spirit fracture, a spark of rebellion igniting amid the pain and shame. I refused to be broken, but the cost was painfully clear. I knew I had to try again, one last time, to bridge the growing chasm between Grace and me. The bitterness of the funeral incident weighed on my heart, but I clung to a flicker of hope that maybe, beneath the layers of manipulation, my mother still cared. I arranged to meet her privately, choosing a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. My voice was steady but vulnerable as I laid everything bare. "Mom, I can't keep doing this," I said, my hands trembling slightly around my coffee cup. "I give and give, but I feel invisible, dismissed. I need respect, acknowledgement, not just for the money, but for everything I do. I'm exhausted from feeling like the family's punching bag." I searched her eyes for any sign of remorse. Grace's face softened momentarily, and I let myself believe she might finally understand. But just as quickly, the softness hardened into coldness. "Scarlett, you're making this about money and grudges," she snapped, voice sharp and dismissive. "Family isn't a business transaction. You don't get to keep score or demand gratitude." Her words hit me like a slap, stripping away the last remnants of hope. I swallowed the lump in my throat as she delivered the final blow. "You'll never be the favorite, Scarlett. Accept it." The cruelty of that sentence echoed louder than any insult, shattering the fragile hope I'd carried for reconciliation. In that moment, I understood that the line had been crossed, that goodwill and kindness had been replaced by cold calculation. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, the weight of rejection pressing down on me. But beneath the pain, a fierce resolve began to burn. I refused to be the invisible daughter any longer. This was no longer about keeping peace. It was about reclaiming my dignity. For the first time, I realized that silence was not my refuge, but my prison, and I was ready to break free. The isolation settled around me like a dense fog, thick and suffocating. At family gatherings, I was no longer just overlooked. I was actively excluded. Grace's subtle manipulations had done their work. Lily avoided eye contact, her smiles tight and forced, as if she were afraid to be seen standing near me. Others in the family echoed the cold distance, parroting Grace's quiet suggestions that I was too emotional, always demanding, or playing the victim. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent chorus that whispered I wasn't enough, that I had overstepped by seeking fairness. Ethan remained my lone anchor, his presence steady but limited. He held my hand at dinner, offering quiet encouragement, but even he couldn't shield me from the growing chasm between me and the rest of my family. The financial strain was a constant ache beneath everything else. Months had passed since I'd lent money to cover bills, tuition, and emergencies, and not a penny had been repaid. Grace's promises to settle debts were empty, dissolving like smoke when confronted. I kept my ledger close, the numbers a cold reminder of how much I had given with no acknowledgement in return. I wondered, not for the first time, if I was the family's ATM only when it suited them, a well to be drained and then forgotten. The quiet moments alone were filled with doubt. What if I had imagined the kindness they once showed, or the love I thought was there? Was I truly the scapegoat? The family's punching bag? The question gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. Beneath the pain, anger simmered, a slow-burning fire I wasn't ready to face. I remembered the countless times I had swallowed my hurt to protect family harmony, the nights I stayed silent despite the ache in my chest. The betrayal stung deeper because it came from those I loved, from the people who should have been my refuge. I felt hollow, a ghost haunting my own life, overlooked and undervalued. Yet, even in this darkest hour, a small part of me refused to fade away. In the silence between the whispered lies and the cold shoulders, a seed of determination took root. If this was how they saw me, if this was the price of being family, then maybe it was time to stop paying. Maybe it was time to break free from the quiet suffering. The loneliness was a heavy cloak, but with it came clarity I hadn't dared to grasp before. I wasn't just a victim. I was a woman pushed to the edge, forced to confront a harsh truth. I could feel the fragile walls around my heart beginning to crack, the first fractures of a new resolve. I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be silent. The path ahead was uncertain and steep, but I knew I couldn't keep walking it alone or on broken knees. Something inside me shifted. A promise whispered in the quiet of my soul. I would find my voice, even if it trembled with fear. I owed myself that much. I owed myself everything. The dinner was supposed to mark a milestone, a celebration of my 34 years, a night filled with warmth and laughter. Instead, it became a battleground, every word a weapon aimed to wound. Grace sat at the head of the table, her smile tight and rehearsed, eyes gleaming with something cold and triumphant. As the meal settled and the chatter softened, she stood and cleared her throat, commanding the room's attention. "I have an announcement," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "After much thought, the family has decided to exclude Scarlett from the upcoming inheritance distribution. She's been ungrateful, selfish even, and this is the consequence." The words hit me like a thunderclap, reverberating through the stunned silence that followed. I looked around, searching for Aunt Margaret's face, hoping for some sign of support, but I only found quiet shock and discomfort. Lily's eyes darted away, avoiding mine like a guilty child caught in a lie. Then Grace dropped another bombshell, a bank statement she'd accidentally left on the table, the numbers glaring in black and white. $15,000, transferred from my account without my knowledge, spent on Lily's lavish overseas trip. The room held its breath, the sting of betrayal sharper than any words. I felt the cold rage ignite deep inside me, the fire spreading rapidly, consuming the shock and the humiliation. This was more than manipulation. This was theft. My hard-earned money, stolen by the woman who was supposed to love me. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the family's collective gaze weighing down on my chest. My heart pounded, not with fear but with a fierce clarity I hadn't known I possessed. The silence was deafening, but inside me, a voice rose, steady and unyielding. No more. I would not be invisible, not a casualty of their greed and deceit. The victim inside me shattered, replaced by something darker, sharper. The avenger awakened. I sat rigid, refusing to let tears betray me, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. The betrayal was complete, but so was my resolve. This was the moment everything changed. That night, alone in my apartment, the weight of years pressed down with unbearable force. The pain wasn't just fresh. It was a lifetime of sacrifices, a tapestry of betrayals carefully woven over decades. I sat with my records spread before me, each receipt, each note, each bank statement a testament to my silent labor. The clarity was painful but necessary. Grace's theft wasn't an isolated act. It was the culmination of a patterned abuse, a calculated exploitation hidden beneath her sweet smiles. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound, but beneath the hurt, anger surged, a fierce, burning force that refused to be contained. I traced the numbers, connecting dots of past manipulations I had barely dared to acknowledge. The loans never repaid, the expenses misappropriated, the promises broken with practiced ease, the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting. I saw it all with fresh eyes, no longer blinded by hope. The years of quiet endurance suddenly seemed like chains around my wrists, and I clenched my fists, feeling the sting of what I had allowed myself to endure. But the anger was not destructive. It was liberating. It was the raw fuel of a fire I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity, my voice. I whispered to the dark room. I carried them all these years. Now it's time they carry the consequences. The secret power I'd hidden away, the meticulous records, the careful tracking, became a weapon in my mind, a shield behind which I could prepare my defense. I was no longer the silent sufferer. The silence that Grace had used to isolate me would become my strategy. No more late-night calls begging for understanding. No more attempts to reason with lies. I would build a wall, brick by brick. The pain was real, but so was my resolve. The victim had broken, but the survivor was rising. In that quiet, lonely room, I made a promise to myself. Never again. The following morning, over coffee, I laid everything bare to Ethan and Aunt Margaret. Ethan's steady gaze met mine, his support unwavering but cautious. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "This will change everything. It won't be easy." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my bones. I have to do this. I can't keep giving, hoping for fairness that never comes. Aunt Margaret listened quietly, her eyes reflecting years of quiet observation. "I've seen enough to know it's not just family drama," she said slowly. "If you need legal help, I have contacts, and I'm willing to testify if it comes to that." Together, we mapped out the first steps, cutting off communication with Grace and Lily. No calls, no texts, no visits. The silent treatment would be my shield and my weapon. I would withdraw the financial support that had become a leash, exposing the theft and reclaiming my boundaries. Ethan warned me of potential backlash, of the storm I was about to unleash, but he was amazed by the strength he saw flickering in me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Aunt Margaret's quiet support gave me courage, the knowledge that I was not completely alone. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone, blocking numbers, deleting social media connections, severing the invisible ties that had bound me for so long. It was a small but powerful act, a declaration of independence. The road ahead was daunting, filled with uncertainty and pain, but for the first time in years, I felt the hard edge of control in my hands. This was my story now, and I would write it on my own terms. No more silence, no more invisibility, no more exploitation. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready to face it head on. I sat at my kitchen table, the soft hum of the city outside my window barely registering, as I spread out the piles of statements, bills, and text logs like a forensic map of my family's tangled debts. The numbers stared back at me, cold and undeniable. Grace relied on me for the mortgage, $200 every month, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. I'd been covering Lily's car payments, the utilities, even those little expenses no one else would admit to. The weight of it all settled heavy in my chest. My family was drowning under my generosity, yet they acted like I was the one who owed them. I reached for my phone and called the family lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Hensley who had handled my father's estate years ago. His voice was calm but firm as he explained the legal angles. "Scarlett, you have undeniable leverage here, but it's about more than just money. The way Grace has been siphoning funds, it's theft, plain and simple. If you gather everything meticulously, you can protect your inheritance and force accountability." Those words stirred something fierce inside me. I wasn't just the family ATM. I was the family's backbone, the unseen pillar holding everything upright. And now, I was finally seeing the cracks that others pretended didn't exist. I sorted through the emails and texts, noticing Grace's dependence on me extended beyond financial support. She needed my social connections, the ones that opened doors for Lily. Job interviews, social events, introductions that Lily would never have gotten on her own. The realization hit me hard. I was the family's secret weapon, and they took that for granted. I felt a swell of both anger and power, as if the very chains that bound me were forged from my own making. But I wasn't about to let that continue. If they needed me this badly, it was time I took control. I started cataloging everything, making folders, printing copies, each piece a nail in the coffin of their deception. The undercurrent of betrayal that Grace had sown for years was finally coming to light, and I was ready to meet it head on. Despite the tension simmering beneath the surface, I kept my composure at our next family gathering. I smiled when Lily showed off her new dress, laughed at Grace's forced jokes, and nodded politely when the topic of my lack of gratitude floated in the air like a poisonous mist. But beneath the surface, I was already shifting gears. Quietly, without a word, I changed the passwords on every joint account I had access to. My own accounts, too. It was a small act of rebellion, but one that felt like pulling a thread from the fabric of their control. I set up automatic payments that required my direct authorization, and I called the utility company, making sure no bills could be paid without my consent. Every transaction, every dollar, would now need my approval. I reached out to Aunt Margaret, my unexpected ally, and asked her to keep a watchful eye, to document anything suspicious. Her cautious nod gave me a sliver of hope. I also hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who could move unseen in the shadows where family secrets fester. The most surprising piece fell into place when the Uber driver who'd given me his contact months ago called. He'd overheard Grace plotting in the backseat of his car, a conversation about diverting my inheritance and manipulating the family's narrative. His recordings were shaky, but his voice was clear and steady. He was ready to testify if needed. The pieces were assembling into a mosaic of truth, and though the storm inside me raged, I wore the calm mask of control. I was preparing, quietly and deliberately, for the reckoning to come. One night, as exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole, I pored over the latest batch of financial statements. My breath caught in my throat when I spotted the withdrawals, unauthorized, totaling nearly $30,000 over 3 years, funneled into accounts I'd never seen, with signatures that didn't match my own. It was proof, cold, stark proof, that Grace wasn't just taking what she needed, she was stealing from me. Heart pounding, I replayed the Uber driver's call in my mind, the weight of his words mixing with the evidence before me. Grace had confided in Aunt Margaret, plotting to erase my stake in the family inheritance forever. The betrayal was no longer a whisper or a suspicion. It was a damning truth, undeniable and raw. I sat back, the room spinning slightly as the enormity of it settled around me. This discovery transformed everything. I was no longer the suspect in my own family's story. I was the victim with irrefutable proof. The moral high ground shifted beneath my feet, and the simmering resentment ignited into a fierce flame of justified anger. The game had changed, and I held the trump card. Suddenly, the years of silence and endurance seemed like a distant memory. I was ready to move, to act, not out of spite, but out of necessity. The quiet war I'd fought inside was about to become a reckoning. For the first time, I felt unequivocally empowered, armed with truth and the support of those who saw the real Grace beneath the facade. Without hesitation, I froze every shared account, pulling back the financial lifeline I'd unwittingly provided for years. Automatic payments stopped, bills went unpaid, and utilities began to flicker like candles in a draft. The silence that once suffocated me became my shield. I blocked Grace and Lily's numbers, severing the constant stream of demands and excuses. The family's bubble began to crack, though they didn't yet see the architect behind it. I watched quietly as Grace scrambled, her calm facade slipping, forced to cover expenses she'd long ignored. The ripple spread beyond our household. Family friends whispered about the sudden financial strain, their curious glances cutting sharper than any words. Despite the chaos I'd unleashed, I maintained my composure. I wasn't reckless. Every move was measured, every silence calculated. Grace's confusion was evident. She couldn't connect this withdrawal of support to my newfound strategy. It was as if I'd become invisible again, but this time by choice, not submission. The first cracks appeared in their armor, subtle but growing. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my bones as the balance of power shifted. The family that once controlled me with emotional manipulation now faced the consequences of their greed. I knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to watch the world burn around me. I was ready to rise from the ashes, stronger and unbroken. The air in Aunt Margaret's drawing room was thick with unspoken tension as I placed my files and recordings deliberately on the polished mahogany table. The relatives gathered around us, some curious, others hesitant. while Grace sat across, her usual mask of warmth faltering under the weight of my quiet resolve. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady presence of Ethan and Aunt Margaret beside me, their support a silent backbone. "I've called this meeting because the truth can no longer be hidden," I began, my voice calm but resolute, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "Grace, you've stolen from me, from this family. I have the bank statements, the unauthorized transfers, and even the Uber driver's testimony to prove it." The room went still, a collective intake of breath echoing in the cramped space. Grace's face paled, her eyes darting frantically as if searching for an escape route. "Scarlett, this is nonsense," she stammered, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I held up my phone, playing the shaky but unmistakable recording of Grace's own voice plotting to divert the inheritance. The words hung in the air, undeniable and damning. "You've drained over $50,000 from my accounts, manipulated the family's finances, and lied to us all," I continued, "and I will no longer be invisible or complicit in this deception." Lily's wide eyes flickered between her mother and me, a dawning realization washing over her features. Aunt Margaret nodded in quiet approval, her gaze steady and unwavering. The power dynamic shifted palpably. I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the family's ATM. I was a force, a voice demanding justice and respect. "This family cannot survive on lies and betrayal," I declared, feeling strength ripple through my veins. "I am done being invisible. Until full restitution is made and respect is restored, I will have no contact with Grace or Lily." The room seemed to exhale collectively, some nodding in agreement, others frozen in disbelief. Grace's composure shattered completely, her eyes welling with tears that felt more like a mask for guilt than genuine remorse. The woman who had controlled our family narrative was now laid bare before us all. For the first time, the facade cracked, revealing the desperate, flawed person beneath. I felt a swelling of vindication and sorrow mixed into one powerful moment, the champagne moment I'd imagined during countless sleepless nights. The family meeting dissolved into murmurs, but I remained seated, steady and unyielding, knowing this confrontation was the beginning of a new era, one where I reclaimed my dignity and my life. Grace's world began to crumble almost immediately. The legal steps Aunt Margaret had quietly advised us to take were set in motion, and the whispers of theft spread through our relatives like wildfire. Calls and messages flooded my phone, not from Grace, but from those who once sided with her, now hesitant and distant. My silence was a fortress. I refused to engage with her desperate apologies or the gifts she sent in clumsy attempts at reconciliation. Each token felt like another manipulation, and I was no longer vulnerable to them. The family's alliances shifted visibly. Even Lily, once so blind in her favoritism, started questioning the stories she had been told, uncertainty shadowing her eyes. Grace's desperation was palpable. She sold off cherished assets, the strain visible in the tremor of her hands and the hollow look she wore wherever she went. The social circles that once embraced her now whispered behind closed doors, and she was increasingly isolated. Yet she kept trying. The love bombing, the frantic pleas, the tearful promises, but I was unmoved. Every attempt met with the cold barrier of my silence and the firm boundaries I set. The financial strain finally forced the family to reckon with the reality I had lived with for years, and the balance of power shifted irrevocably. I watched from a distance, my heart heavy but clear. My silence was now my loudest statement, enforcing accountability without uttering a single word. The final waves of manipulation came crashing toward me like a storm. Grace unleashed her flying monkeys, relatives and acquaintances tasked with guilt trips, threats, and social pressure. I heard the whispers, "You're destroying the family. How could you betray your mother?" The venom dripped through phone calls and messages, each one designed to break me down and isolate me once again. Threats of legal retaliation and public smears hovered like dark clouds, but I was prepared. Legal counsel stood ready by my side, and my emotional armor had hardened after years of silent suffering. Every attempt to break me was documented meticulously. I was no longer a passive target, but a vigilant guardian of my peace. The family's attempts to paint me as the villain fell flat. Their credibility crumbled under scrutiny as I held firm, refusing to engage or justify myself. I watched as Grace's isolation deepened, her manipulations unraveling in the face of my unyielding silence. The network of support she once wielded fractured, and I felt the weight of years of betrayal lift slowly from my shoulders. This was my reclamation, no longer the invisible backbone, but the woman who stood tall, unbowed and unbroken. The battle for my dignity was over. The victory was quiet but undeniable, marked by strength, resilience, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by peace rather than pain. Mornings with Ethan were gentle and unhurried. The weight of financial strain and emotional abuse lifted like a heavy fog. Our apartment, once a refuge I barely had energy to enjoy, now blossomed with calm and hope. Aunt Margaret's presence was a steady light, her trust and transparency a balm to the wounds left by family turmoil. Boundaries were respected, and Grace, though still a shadow in our lives, no longer held the power to control or diminish me. The inheritance, once a source of contention and betrayal, was finally secured with clarity and fairness. In quiet moments, I reflected on the long journey, the years I had carried my family's burden silently, the sacrifices that had once gone unnoticed. Now, I was the woman who stood tall, who no longer faded into the background or accepted invisibility. My future was no longer tethered to their demands or deceit. It was mine to shape, filled with respect, self-worth, and the promise of freedom. As sunlight spilled across the window, warming the room, I whispered to myself, for years, I was the invisible backbone. Now, I am the woman who stands tall. And with that, I stepped fully into the life I had fought so hard to claim, strong, whole, and free.